I really believe in the whole idea of alchemy, that you have the earth, which is pigment and oil basically, but basically it becomes the same thing as they talk about in, say, religion and mythology. It's like you have the body and you have the blood. It's like the things that has the physical thing, but then you have the thing that makes it fluid to actually build from it. Same thing with clay. It's like it's just earth, but you mix a bit of water into it, and all of a sudden you can sculpt with it. So we're working in the same field as sculpture does, but we're making it even more fluid. Even if you go all the way to watercolor, you're on the far spectrum where you have so much water in your medium. There's that part of like solidity to something that's liquid. So I think for me, it's been that part of alchemy. It's a very fascinating thing because it consumes cooking, music, anything, like just using different elements to build things. But the most important thing is time. Time is the thing that makes it come alive. When I work with the palette, I'd like to start with like what is the color circle built up out of? To me, that's more important than what colors you use. So first of all, knowing that like what is warm, what is cool, what works against another color. So for me, like knowing that, like we talked about before, like the alchemy, the same thing goes with the alchemy of light. Like how does it react? Like how do you make something transparent? How do you make something opaque? How do you use warm colors versus cool colors? So when I have my palette, I always keep on changing my colors because I always work with like different moods, and the mood is set by what kind of atmosphere I'd like to put myself into. So does it need to be more like a foggy day? Does it need to be like a Whistler painting? Or does it need to be more like deep colors like in a studio where you have like the glowing light? Or like how would you use those things? A lot of times I do make my own colors, but I also mix it with like buying colors. And like, of course, if I had like an assistant, I would probably just like have them make the colors all the time. But then you realize like good pigments are expensive. To get a good blue is like, that's some expensive pigment. But I usually have a black. That's like if it's a beginning, maybe like a Mars black, maybe an ivory black. Like it doesn't really matter what it is. It's more important like what does the pigment do? So is it more an iron oxide that needs less oil to be used? Or do you use like an ivory black that needs more oil to be grinded with? Because then you can also control like how fast your painting dries. But the same thing when you go around, like I usually want to have like a opaque blue, so I can use like for more reflective. I want to have like a transparent blue. And if you guys start experimenting with colors, you realize very quickly like what happens with an opaque color. It's going to reflect more light. It's going to be brighter. If you mix it with a transparent, it's going to get more dull because the light doesn't reflect on it. So it's more about how do you mix them. Usually kind of try keeping like a transparent green, a deep red. Right now I have a alizarin, which I usually don't use that often. It tends to become like a bit too candy. And then I have an assortment of like earthy browns, everything from like all kind of iron oxides that go more red, that goes more green, that goes more yellow, but just something that kind of, like if it's a beginning, maybe I use an umber because the umber like dries much faster. It's like those things are good. Maybe I use a burnt umber if I need it to be warmer. If I'm gonna start using more layering, maybe I use a more transparent one. I have an assortment of different reds depending on like what I'm gonna use. If I'm gonna use it in the background, maybe I want one that is deeper. If it's gonna be cooler, maybe one that's more purple. Like take a vermilion, for example, it can go more like Chinese vermilion, more towards like a cooler one or more orange one. Like vermilion can be a lot of different pigments depending on where it's been found. And the genuine ones as well, that might be like, if it's like a artificial or a genuine, that depends as well. But then also what happens when you mix it with white? Because that is very important for me, like how I use it for flesh, for example. Maybe I don't want it to go too chromatic. Maybe I don't want it to be too transparent. So like, yeah, I have an assortment of them here, like everything from like Chinese vermilion, genuine vermilion. I try to avoid like things that are too strong though, because that kind of keeps it away from like the core of, I'd like to keep my colors like nice together, like a family. So if you use too artificial colors, like too much cadmiums and stuff, it's like having the family member from the other side of the world that's coming in, and he's like, doesn't even speak the same language anymore, but he's a color. So I mean, but each to his own. And I think live and let live, that's for sure when it comes to colors. But I'm more amazed with like how much you can do with little than what you can do with a lot. So sometimes my palette is only 4 colors, like a limited palette, like a yellow, a black, a red, and a white, to get something that's really harmonious. Maybe even just working in values, because then it's like the colors are so few. It's just a warm and a cool. It's like, and if you think about color circles, like just working in like a grayscale with 2 temperatures, you get color, like a blue and orange, and you get value, black and white. You get the strongest in the center of the color circle, and they still are colors. So that's like probably my favorite, just going back to like where it's so small that you have to be really creative with it, because the less you have, the more creative you get. So for me, like fundamentals is always like the things that you cook from. And if you want to move from one recipe to another, you need to know how to use the basics. But then I keep on going on, like maybe I use like a chrome oxide green just to get like something that's more opaque green. I very rarely use a lot of yellows though, but maybe here's like a raw sienna. And then when I go up all the way to the end, like next to my whites, I usually keep my whites here, but those I usually tend to like either grind by the day, or because the white is the most important pigment. So that one I care a lot for, like consistency and what I'm using my white for, because that's the only one I use in all stages of a painting. So that's why you don't see the white on the palette right now. But then I have like a Naples yellow, like something that's really bright, something that can compensate for off-white. From working with the paint, like working with like what pigments, then how do we put it on the painting? That's probably more because it's something like when you think about, like when you see a surface, like how do you touch that surface, like with your eye? And I think that's where it's so important to kind of like learn how to use your senses, because then you like, how do you translate a surface? Like how would you paint plastic? How would you paint glass? How would you paint like fur? How would you paint skin? And that's why skin is so important, because it has like a little bit of fat on it, but it still has a transparent of layers. Like you get the fascia, you get the tendons, you get the muscles, you get like blood, you got so much happening with somebody blushes, all of a sudden it changes the color. So skin is one of those things that is like extremely interesting to me. So, but all this connects back to touch, like form and touches. So when I use my brushes, I have all kinds of different elongations of my fingers. Yeah, my brushes get to go through a lot of stuff. Like on a big painting, for example, when I use like a big brush, they have a tendency to evolve. It's kind of like when you use a rough canvas, it's like drawing on sandpaper. But then when you move on, they evolve and they become a different personality. But the nice thing with this is that you get a very, very firm tip, so you can actually start drawing with the paint. While something like this holds a lot of paint and it's very soft. I like having like a variation of fingerprints happening with my brushes. Like if it's, because also something that's a bit ruined, you don't have to be so careful with. And sometimes being more rough with them allows you to explore your thoughts more. Because if you start caring a little bit too much, I mean, this is different for everyone. Some people like cleaning their brush and keeping it super clean. I keep mine in just the oil bath, and then I wash them a few times a year whenever I go traveling, for example. But I do both of them. But having a little bit of like not so much respect for materials, at least for me personality-wise, and everybody needs to find their own rhythm to how they like to work. But when I do that, I don't have to worry about that part. I can just worry about my vision, and that's where I'd like to be.